Hello everyone. I'm Yumu from Susan's family. Today, I'm bringing you a shawl named Ginkgo from our Fu collection. For the charts of this project, please search for our website by the keyword en001.com. This shawl is divided into section 1, section 2, and tassels. Color changing is needed during the process. Let's start by making section 1. We'll do cable cast on and work back and forth to form two types of patterns like these. We'll make leaves at the end of the pattern on the right. A horizontal line in the diagram chart represents a purl stitch. A vertical line represents a knit stitch. To make the diagram less dense, the empty squares also represent knit stitches. Multiple stitch techniques are needed, and they are all marked on the chart, so I won't list them one by one here. Now let's start together. Take up the corresponding yarn. The colors for this sample are random. Here, we use 2 strands as one yarn to work. At the beginning, the 2 strands are in the same color. You can take the tails from both the center and the outer ring of the skin and combine them as one. Here, to make it easier to watch, I will work with a single strand of cotton yarn. For the specific yarn, color scheme, and circular needle size, please check the detail page of our product and the paper chart. Now, cast on. Make a slip knot first. And place it onto one end of the circular needle. Hold the other end with your right hand. Insert the loop. Knit 1 stitch. The loop goes onto the left needle. Then insert the gap between these 2 stitches and knit 1. Transfer the loop to the left needle. Continue to do cable cast on. We should have 4 stitches. As you can see, the cast on is completed. Now, work on row 1. Read the chart from right to left. You'll see vertical symbols all across, indicating knit stitches. The edge stitch can be worked a bit tighter. Now, row 1 is done. If the last loop is loose, you can gently tighten the starting tail. Consider the side with the tail on the left as the right side. Continue with row 2. Read this row on the chart from left to right. Turn the piece and hold it with your left hand. Hang the yarn on your right hand. The chart only shows the right side. For the wrong side, we should purl all stitches. Make sure the yarn is above the needle. The edge stitch can be worked slightly tighter. You can see the tile texture forming below. This completes row 2. Continue with row 3. Knit all stitches. When done, you can see the braid-like texture forming below. After completing, work on row 4. Purl all stitches. Make sure the yarn is above. Row 4 is done. For row 5 to 6, follow the method for row 3 to 4. Now, let me show you how to count rows. With the right side of the fabric facing up, count a column of braids from bottom up. The number of braids indicates the number of rows knitted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here, 6 rows have been knitted. If you need to count rows later, simply count the continuous braids. Now, continue with row 7. Start by knitting 2 stitches. Then, increase 1 stitch by backward loop. Place your right index finger under the yarn. Rotate it counterclockwise to form a crossing loop. Place this loop onto the right needle from back to front. Slightly tighten. This is 1 backward loop. Continue with knit 1. And 1 backward loop. Place your right index finger under the yarn. Rotate it counterclockwise to form a crossing loop. Place this loop onto the right needle from back to front. Slightly tighten, another backward loop is done. Here, you can mark below the needle, close to the braid of the increase. This makes it convenient to count the rows between 2 increases on the edge. After completing, knit 1. Row 7 is done. Continue with row 8. Follow the chart to purl 3 stitches first. When you reach the increase position, it might be tricky to pick up. You can loosen the loop before you purl. Next, we have a symbol for purl 1. Here, we should knit 1. When we're doing knit stitch after a purl stitch, pay attention to the position the yarn properly. Continue to purl more stitches. Again, position the yarn properly. After completing, row 8 is done. Continue with row 9. Knit 1 first. Then knit 1 stitch through the back loop. Insert the right needle from front to back into the back loop. Yarn over and draw through. At the same time, release the loop on the left needle. K1 TBL is completed. Take a look. It forms a twisted braid texture underneath. Continue with purl 1. Then knit the rest stitches of the row. Row 9 is finished. Continue with row 10. First, purl evenly. You can follow the texture as you work. Purl for the purl texture. Knit for the knit texture. Purl for the TBL position as well. Row 10 is completed. Now for row 11. You can also work following the texture. Edge stitch should be knitted. K1 TBL for the TBL column. Insert the right needle from front to back into the back loop. Yarn over and draw through. Release the loop. 1 TBL stitch is done. Knit for the knit texture. The edge stitch on the right side should always be knitted. Row 11 is completed. Continue with row 12. The edge stitch on the wrong side should always be purled. Then work following the texture. Row 12 is completed. Continue with row 13. First, work following the texture. Don't forget to K1 TBL for the TBL column. After the purl stitch, increase 1 by back loop. Here, place the yarn behind the needle first. To prevent extra stitches, before all increases by back loop on both the right and wrong side, you should always place the yarn behind the needle before you work. I won't repeat this cliché. Continue following the chart to complete this row. Don't forget to mark the rows with increased stitches. Row 13 is completed. For the following row 14 to 20, continue following the chart and work back and forth. Don't get the increased positions wrong. Also, mark them properly. Remember to K1 TBL for the TBL column on the right side. Complete these rows. Now for row 21. First, knit 1. K1 TBL. Purl 1. Then yarn over 1. Wrap the yarn from front to back around the right needle. So we have 1 loop increased on the right needle. Yarn over 1 is now complete. Then SKP 1. With your right needle, slip the next loop knitwise. Then knit 1. Pass the skipped stitch over with your left needle. SKP1 is completed. We'll use this technique later. You can see the right stitch is over the left one. Continue to increase 1 by back loop. After completing, knit to the end of the row. Row 21 is finished. Continue with row 22. First, purl evenly. Before the increase position from the previous row. Increase 1 by back loop. Here, place the yarn behind before you work. Then continue with purl 3. For the yarn over position, just purl it. Now, knit 1. And purl 2. Row 22 is completed. Move on to row 23. Start with knit 1. K1 TBL. Purl 1. One K2 tog. The right needle goes through the next 2 loops from front to back, left to right. And knit 1 stitch. 1 K2 tog is done. We will use this technique later. You can see the left loop in over the right one. Continue with yarn over 1. Wrap the yarn from front to back around the right needle. Yarn over 1 is completed. Continue with 1 K2 tog. The right needle goes through the next 2 loops from front to back, left to right. The increase position might be a bit difficult to insert. And knit 1 stitch. 1 K2 tog is completed. Now yarn over 1. Before the continuous knit stitches, increase 1 by back loop. Continue knitting. Before the last stitch, remember to increase. For the rest rows of section 1, we increase 1 stitch on the left edge on the right side, every 4 rows. Don't miss this, we won't repeat this reminder later. Row 23 completed. Continue with row 24. First, purl evenly. Before the increase position in the middle of the previous row, increase 1 by back loop. Then, follow the chart to complete this row. This part might be a bit tricky to work through. You'll need to be patient. Row 24 completed. Continue with row 25. Just follow the chart as you go. Now, work 1 skp. We'll slip 1 stitch knitwise, then knit 1 stitch. And pass the slipped stitch over. Continue knitting. For TBL, simply insert the back hook and knit. Continue to complete this row. You can see 2 textures forming on the fabric. On the left, we have stocking stitches. On the right, we have pattern like this. For the following row 26, directly follow the chart and work it on the wrong side. Next, for row 27, follow the chart to start. Note here, after the second yarn over, you need to purl 1. Make sure to wrap the yarn above before you do. Mind not to miss any stitches. Continue to complete this row. Row 27 is completed. For the following row 28 to 32, please finish them following the chart. Here, I'll explain the pattern with this sample. On the right side, the first stitch is always a knit stitch. The TBL and the purl stitches on its flanks are always worked according to the texture. For the 4 stitches between these 2 purl stitches, in one row, yarn over to increase first, and then decrease. In the next right side row, decrease first, and then yarn over to increase. This creates an interlaced lace pattern like this. For the pattern on the right, we repeat a group of 7 stitches like this. For the stitches near the stocking stitch pattern, just knit according to the chart. But, if you have fewer than 2 or 4 stitches between these 2 purl stitches, for the stitch before the back loop increase, knit 1 directly on the back loop increase of the previous row, and then do 1 back loop increase. For the stocking stitches on the left, knit the stitches before the last stitch. Increase 1 stitches for every 4 rows. Be mindful to mark the rows which you increased. On the wrong side. For the stocking stitch pattern, purl stitches. And increase before the increase of the previous row. For the lace pattern, knit for the knit stitches. And purl for the TBL column. For the 4 stitch between 2 purl stitches, purl all stitches. If the stitch after the back loop increase is uncertain, find the nearest knit texture and read the pattern to the right. We have 4 purl stitches and knit 1. Then purl 1 and knit 1 again. Now you reach the first stitch of the pattern. For all last stitches on the wrong side, purl, follow the rule, and refer to the chart to finish these rows. Now, work row 33. Start with knit 1. Then work 1 ink 3 STS. Insert the loop and knit 1. Do not release the loop yet? Then yarn over 1. Insert the same loop and knit 1. Release the loop. 1 ink 3 STS is now complete. Continue following the chart or texture to finish this row. After that, continue with row 34. After the final knit stitch, work purl stitches for the previous ink 3 STS. Purl the last stitch. We will treat the ink 3 STS part as the leaf. Row 34 is completed. For the following row 35 to 36, work following the chart. It won't be difficult to you. Now work row 37. Start with knit 1. Then work 1 left lift increase. Start with knit 1. Find the second braid under this stitch on the right needle. Pick up the left leg of it with the left needle. And knit 1. This is the increased stitch. 1 left lift increase is now complete. Check the texture below. 2 stitches are worked within 1 braid. Continue to do 1 more left lift increase. Start with knit 1. Then pick up the leg with the left needle. Knit 1. Another left lift increase is now complete. Work another left lift increase. Below, follow the texture to complete this row according to the chart. After finishing, work on row 38. After the last knit stitch, purl all stitches. Row 38 is completed. For row 39 to 42, work according to the chart. Work the pattern following the previous rule. Increase at the corresponding position above the leaves. Note that the last stitch of row 42 is not worked. It won't be difficult to you. Now work on row 43. Turn. Work 1 double stitch first. Place the needle under the yarn. Then pick up the loop from back to front. Pull the yarn backwards to tighten. This leaves 2 loops on the right needle. A double stitch is created. Continue knitting the corresponding number of stitches. After completing, there should be one stitch left before the purl stitches. Continue with row 44. Turn. Work one double stitch first. Place the needle under the yarn. Then pick up the loop from back to front. Pull the yarn backwards slightly to tighten. A double stitch is completed. Continue to purl stitches. Make sure to place the yarn properly before you go. When you encounter a double stitch, treat the two loops as one and work normally. After the last stitch, this row is finished. Next, work on row 45. Start by binding off. Here, you need to bind off 14 stitches. You can use stitch markers to mark the corresponding number of stitches. The double stitch counts as one stitch. The method for binding off here is a bit special. First, combine the first two stitches and knit them as one stitch. Bind off one stitch. There will be one loop on the right needle. Slip it onto the left needle. Continue combining and knitting stitches. Another stitch is bound off. Repeat this process to continue binding off. Don't make the binding off too loose or too tight. When you encounter a double stitch, treat the two loop as one. Work until you reach the stitch marker. After that, bind off this loop as well. Check the chart. On the left side, there is a knit stitch. Combine this loop on the right needle with it. And knit one. That binds off the last stitch, and completes the first knit stitch. Now we have the first leaf done. Continue with knit 1. End of the pattern. Then purl 1. Ink 3 STS. First, insert the loop and knit 1. Do not release the loop yet. Yarn over 1. Insert the same loop and knit 1. Release the loop. The ink 3 STS is now complete. Continue with the pattern. Don't forget to increase stitches according to the chart at the end. Row 45 is completed. For row 46, work following the chart. And leave the last stitch unworked. Turn and work on row 47. Place the remaining stitch on the left needle. Mark after these 2 stitches. Then, bind off as we did before. There is 1 loop before the marker. Combine it with the next stitch and knit 1. This way, you have bound off 1 stitch, and have the first stitch knitted, following the chart to knit 1. And purl 1. Knit the leaf section correspondingly. Then continue following the chart to finish this row. Continue with row 48. Turn the piece before you go. Leave the last stitch unworked. Continue with row 49. Bind off 2 stitches as in row 47. Later, when you are familiar with the pattern, you don't even need to use markers. There is still 1 loop. Combine it with the next stitch and knit 1. Now, do left lift increase for the leaf section correspondingly. After that, continue with the pattern. Row 49 is completed. For the following row 50 to 56, continue with the pattern according to the previous video. For the leaf section, work just like we did for the leaves from row 38 to 44. Please follow the previous demonstration and the chart as you go. Let me show you how to bind off for leaf part. Place a marker to separate the stitches that need to be bound off. Then, combine and knit to bind off. When you have only one loop before the maker, combine it with the next stitch and knit one. This completes the bind off. The second leaf is also completed. For the subsequent leaves, work them in this way. Consider the stitches after the bind off for the first leaf, and before the bind off for the second leaf, as one group. For the rest of section 1, we'll repeat this group. Note that the leaf parts are identical, while the pattern part follows the increase rule. For the stocking stitch section, starting from row 57, you need to work lace pattern like this. The stitch techniques have been demonstrated before. Pay attention, we always start this lace pattern on the row we bind off for the leaf. For a angled pattern, which tilts to the left like this, space 2 stitches from the middle increase position. For a angled pattern, which tilts to the right, space 8 stitches from the middle increase position on the row where we bind off for the leaf. As the number of stitches increases, the number of patterns also increases. Space 8 stitches between 2 lace patterns. As you go, you may mark the row we do the bind off. This makes it convenient to count the rows between 2 lace patterns. You also need to change colors during the process. The first time happens after the bind off for the third leaf. And the rest should be arranged after finishing 6 leaves in the current color. I'll know you how to do it. Here, I am working on a sample. Please ignore the stitch techniques and focus on color changing. After the bind off for the third leaf, pick one strand of the yarn from behind, leave a 10 cm tail before you cut the old yarn. Then take the corresponding yarn. Tie a knot. Push it down to the bottom. Make the knot as tight as possible. Then combine the 2 strands and continue to work. Pay attention to the texture after color changing. If you need to count the rows with the new yarn, start counting from the row before the color changing. Weave in the tail on the wrong side, following the texture in the same color. Here, you can use a sewing needle for assistance. You can secure it with a few more stitches. Trim off the excess. Secure the other tail in the same way. This is how we change colors. All of the following color changing should be done like this for this piece. Please follow the chart. To finish section 1, bind off for the last leaf. That concludes section 1. Next, let's work on section 2. Take a look at the finished project. Section 2 is work back and forth after section 1. We continue to increase on the left. And do short rows to decrease on the right. Let's do this together. Work on row 1 first. The bind off for the leaf is already done here. To make it easier to watch, I'll be working with a new color on this sample, with fewer stitches. Please focus on the techniques. Start by working the lace pattern according to the chart. Note that you don't need to do the ink 3 STS here. The stitch count of the sample is different from the finished project. The ending stitch also differs. Please check the actual project for actual data. before the stocking stitch pattern. Do back loop to increase. Then work the stocking stitch pattern according to the chart. The lace pattern is worked in the same way as before. The pattern is random on this, the sample. Don't forget to increase at the end. You don't need to place a marker here. For section 2, we always increase before the last stitch on the right side. Row 1 is completed. You can mark this row. This makes it convenient to count the rows between the lace patterns. Continue to work row 2. Purl for the stocking stitch pattern. To make it easier to distinguish, you can place a marker before the stocking stitch pattern. Purl evenly for the stocking stitch pattern. After that, we reach the back loop increase from the previous row. No need to increase here. Purl 9 stitches according to the texture. Remember, for the pattern section on sample, the stitches near the stocking stitch pattern are worked randomly. Please check the actual project for actual data. Do not work the rest stitches. Place a marker here. Continue to work on row 3. Turn. Work 1 double stitch first. Then work according to the texture. Do not increase for the middle part. For the following stocking stitch pattern, and the middle part of the lace pattern on the right, no increases are needed. Continue with the stocking stitch pattern. Don't forget the lace pattern. And increase at the end. Row 3 is completed. Continue to work on row 4. Start with purl stitches. Work the patterns according to the chart. Until you have 2 stitch before the double stitch. That means 3 stitches before the marker. Row 4 is completed. You can mark the double stitch here, or find it based on the texture. If you are not certain, place a marker to mark it. Continue with row 5. First, do the double stitch. Then work according to the texture. After that, move on to row 6. Work according to the texture until there are 2 stitches before the next double stitch. Row 6 is completed. For the following rows, start with the double stitch on the right side. Then work according to the texture. After completing the pattern on the right, work according to the texture for the stocking stitch pattern. And don't forget the lace patterns. We have 10 rows between the first row of this lace pattern and the row before this one above it. Please be mindful to mark the rows as you go. Don't get the position wrong. On the right side, you need to increase stitches at the end. On the wrong side, purl stitches until you have 2 stitches left before the double stitch. Please complete the second to last row of section 2. I'll do the last row on this sample. The sample doesn't have the lace pattern finished. In practice, you need to complete all the lace patterns according to the chart. For the second to last row, work until you reach the required stitch before the last double stitch, according to the chart. The remaining stitches on the sample are random. We will work the last row on the wrong side. For the stocking stitch pattern, purl evenly. When you encounter a double stitch, treat it as one stitch and work normally. For the lace patterns, follow the previous rules. To knit for the knit stitches, and purl for the rest. For the double stitch, work it according to the texture below. Please don't get it wrong. Continue all the way down until you have only 1 stitch left on the needle. The last row is now complete. Next, bind off. The technique is the same as the leaf's final bind off. Turn. Bind off. Now, you have 1 loop left. Leave a 10 cm tail and cut. Enlarge the loop. Pass the tail through the loop. Pull tight. Work the tail into the wrong side, along the texture for a few more stitches. If there are any remaining tails, work them into the wrong side in the same color area. You can remove the stitch markers. That concludes section 2. And lastly, we make the tassels. Prepare a cardboard strip that is 12 centimeters in length. The length here is random for the sample. Then take the yarn for section 2. Cut 2 pieces and combine them as one. Take 1 piece and place it on the cardboard. Then take all the yarn. The colors are random for the sample. Take 2 strands of each yarn. Combine them and wrap around the cardboard. About 12 times. After completing, trim excess tails. Tie a knot at the top. Pull tight. You can tie a few more knots to secure. Remove the loops. Cut the ends open. Take another piece of yarn. Wrap about 1 centimeter from the head of the tassel. Sort out the loops. And wrap tightly. Tie a knot. Hide the tails inside the tassel. The ends can be trimmed evenly. One tassel is now complete. You can make another one in the same way. Finally, thread the yarn at the head of the tassel into the sewing needle. Sew it to the beginning of section 1 and the end of section 2. Here I'll be working on this sample. Secure it properly. Finish by tying a knot. Secure the tails. Secure the other tail as well. Sew the other tassel in the same way. Up to this point, the entire shawl has been covered. If you have any questions during the process, don't hesitate to reach out to our customer service. Susan's family, supporting your handwork experience, sharing the joy of life. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.